Be with you again, Natasha.
Michael, you are in Odessa. In the last couple of days, we've really been talking about the bridge being attacked in Crimea. We've been talking about Zaporizhia and Kyiv. But Odessa is still so critical in this ongoing war. Give me a sense of what you're seeing and hearing around you.
Sure. Well, fortunately, Odessa was spared from those horrific attacks. Missiles and those deadly Iranian-made kamikaze drones did head this way. Fortunately, the Ukrainian authorities were able to shoot them down. But nonetheless, I mean, there was a lot of anxiety here in the past couple of days. People here saw what has gone on elsewhere in Ukraine, and we can't be sure that those weapons will stop at any time soon. But, you know, Natasha, I think what has happened here and elsewhere in Ukraine is that the fear that Ukrainians originally had at the start of the war about 7 months ago has been replaced with anger and determination and this irrepressible desire to push the Russians back to pre-2014 lines. And I would think that might even include reclaiming Crimea, which was illegally annexed, and the occupied territories. So Ukrainians are going about their lives. I mean, just outside my window here yesterday, I saw two couples getting married outside. You know, people are trying to go about their normal lives. I know restaurant and business owners who are working really hard to get their businesses back up and running, investing in renovations, things like that, because they really expect this war to be over soon and the Russians to be pushed back.
You know, this issue of re-seizing Crimea, this is something we've heard from a chief intelligence officer from the Ukrainian military, Ministry of Defense. And it just sort of surprised a lot of us that this sense of confidence just sort of pushing ahead, despite the length of the war itself already, and that we're going into winter months. What is giving the Ukrainians this level of confidence?
Yeah, it's really incredible. That's right. The head of intelligence of the Ukrainian Defense Forces said that, he said it in Ukrainian, at the minimum, he expects Ukraine to enter Crimea by the end of the year. And, you know, Natasha, the past 7 months have been a sense of real deja vu for Ukrainians because they remember the 1932-33 Holodomor, when millions of Ukrainians died in a man-made famine. And, you know, we're seeing the same thing happening again, except because now the world is so intertwined that Putin's weaponization of food, for example, is reverberating through the Middle East, North Africa, around the world, really, and even in Canada, and higher food prices. So what Ukrainians want to see is really strong backing from the West to push the Russian forces back. And I got to say also, Natasha, that with all due respect to our Western leaders, I don't think they've done a very good job of explaining to ordinary people, ordinary Canadians, for example, of why Mr. Putin needs to be pushed back. So, you know, I had people in London recently ask me, why are we funding this war effort while we're suffering so much at home? So, for example, people like myself, I'll be in Canada, in Toronto and Winnipeg before the end of the month to explain that as well, because people really have to understand that it's better to push back Mr. Putin on our own terms rather to meet him on his terms, and that won't turn out very well at all.
Michael, put that into layman's terms for me, please. What do you mean? Okay, so I hear you that perhaps our leaders have not done a good enough job convincing us that we need to be this involved when there is such a lack of desire to go to war at any point. So what is at stake for us? What happens if we meet him on his terms?
Sure. So far, he's been able to weaponize energy. I think everyone understands that, especially with the Nord Stream pipelines. He's been able to weaponize food by blocking the port of Odessa. It is slowly opening up, but there's a huge backlog of grain and sunflower oil, things like that. And then also weaponizing migration. And that's happening as we speak right now. There were more bombings today, and that forces Ukrainians to leave their hometowns to seek safe shelter beyond Ukraine's borders, including in Canada. And that's a big burden. I understand it in many developed economies because of the way the economies are going. So it will only get worse if Mr. Putin is not pushed back. Already, I mean, I repeated this message in London that people there should the war not end quickly, should get ready for a war economy and everything that entails. And I think Canadians might have to expect the same thing as well.
There's the issue of resources and sanctions, the economy, all of that, I understand, Michael, but a big fear for a lot of people and a constant topic of discussion is what is the red line for Putin, and at what stage does the threat of nuclear war become a reality?
Well, Mr. Putin well knows how to manipulate the egos of Western leaders. He well knows how to use the fears of voters to his own end. So he doesn't have any red lines. When someone like him is pushed into a corner, as he's slowly being pushed right now, he acts erratically and dangerously. And I think President Biden made that pretty clear yesterday in that CNN interview. So the thing Mr. Putin does not understand is resistance. So he probes and probes and probes for soft tissue until he meets resistance. So the most important thing right now for the West is to show two things: unity and strength. And I think, you know, yesterday was a really good day for the Ukrainians. If you listen to what the Secretary General of NATO said, that G7 statement, which included Canada, and a number of other leaders' statements, they said we're all in terms of weaponry, in terms of support, and also in terms of things like the rebuilding of Ukraine, which is going to be very, very big bill after all. So the right things are happening finally, but it's taken quite some time to get to this point.
And just before I let you go, you've mentioned something 7 months ago, and you're mentioning it again now in an op-ed for CNN, which is that you think it's time for Washington to really lean on China and India to be the sort of go-betweens for a message of peace. Explain that to me. What can they do that the West cannot?
Sure. Well, the United States can lean on those two countries, Beijing and Delhi, for urgent telephone diplomacy with Moscow. I think the only person Mr. Putin respects and probably fears is Chinese leader Xi Jinping. So I know that we don't have much leverage with China, but I think China, being a pragmatic nation in many ways, understands what a nuclear weapon use would look like. It changes the balance of power hugely. So I think if anyone can have some kind of influence on Mr. Putin, it would be China. So hopefully they get the message and use that. And also, of course, there's Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. But I think he, too, is becoming increasingly frustrated with Russia and Mr. Putin, especially after the strikes this week.
Okay. We'll be watching and seeing how things unfold. Michael Bosacue in Odessa, Ukraine, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.